where do I begin? 36 years nearly, just shy by a month. I've had a whole load of memorable events, too many really to mention. Of particular relevance, I think, simply because, I've had the privilege of being there when it's happened. So, somebody who loves history, to be there when historical moments have transpired, gives you a real buzz. So I suppose that, some of them would have been when we had the tripartite discussions here in Gibraltar. It's quite surreal standing not 3 meters away from the Spanish Foreign Secretary here in Gibraltar. That was, as I said, surreal, but a huge buzz because of what it was. We had the accession into UEFA at the time. I was there for that. There when Cayano Lorino came back, you name it. Been there, numerous elections, numerous referenda. They're all historical moments. So, and you're there, and you're part of that history, and that is really, really memorable, and will live very much long in the memory for me.
Which would you say are the most important ways in which the force has developed during your time?
Going back to 1983 when I joined, I'm sure the viewers will be familiar with the series Life on Mars, well, pretty much, without all the added dramatics, of course. But policing, and the Royal Gibraltar Police is no exception. Policing is constantly evolving because we need to keep pace with societal change and societal progress. And by way of example, when if you were on call, as I was when I was in CID back in the 80s and 90s, you had to stay at home by the phone, because then if you moved somewhere, you need to call in to let them know where you're going to be and at which phone number you're going to be. We then made a huge leap into using bleepers, and now, as we all know, we've got mobile phones and we are 24/7 engaged, which is a good and a bad thing, because you need to know how to disengage, because you need to recharge batteries. But that gives you just an inkling of how much it's changed. As far as the organisation is concerned, we've become far more professional than we were when I joined. It's not to say that we weren't professional then, but we were professional for the times. And I think that everything needs to be seen against the backdrop of the times that we live in and the times that we anticipate living in. And that is how the police service in general and the RGP in particular evolves, because we're constantly in a state of flux, but a directed state of flux.
What do you think are the major challenges currently facing the force?
Well, we've got the dirty B word, of course, Brexit. That is something that we've been heavily involved with for the past couple of years, going on 3 years now, since the referendum in 2016. So ever since then, and this gives you an inkling of how forward-thinking the police service is, we started planning and assessing what the risks were for policing way back then, and as indeed government started doing it way back then. So these are the things that we've been planning for. That is one major issue that we will be dealing with. Cybersecurity. Cyber is an emerging threat that we need to address, and we are addressing by training officers, by obtaining equipment, by engaging with partners locally and abroad, in order to ensure that we are as best prepared as possible. And an awful lot of that, of course, is to do with awareness and raising awareness. And the other one, of course, the other major one, and of course these are in addition to the normal crime, if you can call it such. The other one, of course, is national security and counter-terrorism, which continues and unfortunately will continue for the foreseeable future. And it's one of those things that we need to manage, and it's pretty much a balancing act in terms of resourcing and focus and prioritization and everything else.
You've mentioned national security, for example. Obviously, one of the things the RGP needs to do is liaise with other law enforcement agencies on a regular basis. So how is this going to be affected by Brexit, do you think?
I mean, this has been a consultation process that government has been working on for years now. And so an awful lot of the legal instruments that we need to continue functioning have already been either been resolved or will be resolved in good time in terms of prioritization. In terms of how we engage with partners, in particular our Spanish colleagues, cops are cops are cops. And irrespective, even in the darkest days of Margallo and all the rest of them who impose these restrictions, police officers will always talk to police officers simply because we have a common enemy, and the common enemy is the criminal. And sometimes with greater impetus than others, but we have always spoken, and we enjoy excellent relationships with not just our Spanish colleagues in the Guardia Civil and the Policía Nacional, but also in the local police services, but also even further afield, with Portugal, France, Germany. We talk, and I suppose that the liaison that creates, the goodwill that creates, despite political, diplomatic difficulties that may exist at any time, has enabled us to continue working together. So, and things are pretty much good. So I really don't see that getting worse.
And domestically, in terms of resourcing, how would you like to see the RGP manned, equipped and deployed?
Okay, that is a large body of work. We have a commitment from government that there will be increased resources, which is incredibly welcome, because the demand that is expected of the 21st century is far greater than what it was not so many years ago. And this is work that is going forwards. The way that will be worked once we get those resources is that it will be done on work that has already been and has been and will continue to be conducted, which is in terms of assessing where our priorities lie, where the risk areas are. There is an RGP force risk matrix or register, which details specifically where our risks are, so that we can anticipate what's going to happen, so that we can flexibly resource our needs and our demands, and that's the way that it will happen. In answer to your question, I cannot tell you, because things might change overnight. So there may be, God forbid, there may be a requirement to deal with more counter-terrorism than perhaps with, general criminality. We may need to deal more with safeguarding children and vulnerable people. The question is pretty much unanswerable, except that you need to understand what the risks and the threats are before you can actually resource. And that's something that, the RGP is pretty good at, and we have been, not least because we are a small force. We cannot, other than the GDP, rely on mutual aid. This isn't the same as Essex relying on the Metropolitan and the Metropolitan relying on Greater Manchester Police, etc. We are and have to be self-sufficient, which means that our officers and civilian staff are multi-hatted, but without the luxury of not being masters of all. We have to be masters of all, because that is the way that self-sufficient island economy type police services have to operate.
And finally, what changes would you like to see? What direction would you want to see the force moving in?
To continue progressing. But that is something that will happen under the stewardship of the command team. That is what we have always done, and we will continue to do. And I think that Gibraltar needs to be very proud of its police service. In 36 years, I have met and observed many different police services across the world. There is nothing that we have that we need to be envious of any others. We are as professional, indeed far more professional in certain areas than other larger police services. And all I can say as a parting shot is it's been an absolute privilege to work with my colleagues over the last 36 years, and even more importantly, to be able to serve my community. We don't all get the privilege, this isn't a job, it's a vocation, and to be given the opportunity to be able to serve is, I think, huge, certainly from a personal perspective.